Welcome to Discerning Truths with Bill Donahue. You see some names in the chat I don't normally see in here, so welcome to the new people. On Fridays, I do stuff that's a little different. I generally teach on subjects that you're never, ever going to hear taught in church. I pretty much guarantee it. Um, so we're doing the same thing today. I have a lot of material to cover, so I want to get through the um, introductory slides quickly. The most important thing on here is on Telegram. I created a Telegram group called Discerning Truths Group. The PDFs that I'm going to show on screen today, or the slides, I will convert to PDFs and they'll be up there. You may want to download them and go through them yourself. And this is going to be a lot of information to take in. Okay, so just I'm forewarning you now, that's a good place to go. If you're new here, I normally teach Monday and Wednesday in Isaiah until we finish. We just did Isaiah 59, so I got 6 more chapters to go, right? And on Monday and Wednesday. On Tuesday, I'm guest on with Neil. We talk about whatever Neil wants to talk about. And just have a free-flowing conversation. And on Friday, I let the Spirit take me where it wants. And we talk about everything from aliens to lost books of the Bible to like this, worldviews and how they impact how we see things. My good friend Michael Beatty is on at 5:30 a.m. West Coast time, Sunday to Friday. He takes Saturday where he doesn't stream, but he never takes a day off. He's always writing songs or doing memes. And on Sunday, his wife Linda joins him. I've been getting up for most days. It's 2:30 a.m. here in Kauai, so it's a challenge to make those shows, but I've been doing a pretty good job of listening in. I highly recommend it. Michael's been faithful with his gift of music, and God has given him another gift of teaching, and he is really bringing the book to life in 2 Corinthians today. If you missed it, go back and watch it on replay on Cloud Hub. Absolutely excellent treatment of that chapter. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the today's subject. If you haven't ever seen The Truth Project by Dr. Dale Tackett, it was put out by Focus on a Family a number of years ago. I heard he's going to do a sequel to it. Highly recommend it if you're unfamiliar with worldviews. And then you never know what you're going to learn from somebody. It was in that Truth Project that I was turned on to a book called The Strange Dating of the Kings, which just was phenomenal for a geek like me. May not be fun for all of you, but it helped me sort out some of the weird dating in the Old Testament. And then, but when he discussed the worldviews in there and what makes it up, he really set the foundation for this, what I'm going to do today. And so I'm just going to jump forward like you've seen some of that. Everybody has a worldview. I have a worldview. Critics have a worldview. Everybody has one. Now, my worldview was pretty much open when I started. My worldview started as one that was open to the possibility that God could exist and that Jesus could be God in human flesh and have risen from the dead. I also accepted the possibility that God, if he existed, could reveal himself to man. I didn't exclude that by my worldview. I said, if the evidence, I'll go wherever the evidence leads me. If it leads me that there's no God, then I'm a happy camper. I'll live my life any way I want. If it leads me that there is a God, then I want to know which God we're talking about. And if it's leading me that it's the God of the Bible and that Jesus rose from the dead, then I want to know what God wants from me and did God reveal anything. So I started with that openness to any truth and wherever it would lead. And after examining the evidence, my worldview evolved because I am now convinced by the evidence that God does exist in Trinity. Jesus is both God and man, and he did raise Jesus from the dead. I've also discovered the Bible to be a reliable record of God's revelation of, to man of himself. So that evolved worldview makes it easier for me to filter out some hypotheses that I run into. Because if a hypothesis conflicts with that worldview, I'm immediately subject to it or suspect of it, right? So you filter it through, and one of the ones we're going to deal with is called the documentary hypothesis, and I'm going to discuss it in a minute. But I immediately saw that as flawed because I have clear testimony from Jesus addressing that hypothesis and refuting it. If Jesus is God incarnate and was here on the thing, then he has no reason to lie or any reason not to know what is true or not true. So the fact that Jesus refutes it and some scholars like it, I'm going to side with Jesus. And that's how your worldview affects things. Now, someone starting from a worldview that's 100% naturalistic has, by definition of their worldview, already eliminated the possibility that God exists or that miracles happen in his or her worldview. Once even the possibility of God is gone from one's worldview, then creation, the flood, the Exodus, the law given to Moses, the resurrection of Jesus, they're all excluded by definition. The worldview filters them out. It's a presumption of naturalism that's going to make all those go away. That worldview, which completely discounts miracles and the existence of a personal God or a Savior, would look at the same evidence that I'm looking at and determine that creation, Adam, Abraham, Moses, Joshua, David, and the Exodus, the resurrection are all myths. They're doing it because they have assumed. It's a presupposition coming into this argument. Now, some of these people would say that they looked at the evidence and came to that conclusion, and I would give them that benefit of the doubt, other than I'm going to challenge whether they actually looked at the evidence, because the evidence is pretty overwhelming, right? But I just don't want you to be fooled in thinking that either that person or I am completely objective. None of us are. We're all filtering data through our worldviews. The difference is I'm honest enough to make you aware of my confirmation biases, right? While many of them will claim objectivity. And that's the lie. That's the trick that comes on in here, because they want to tell you that they're being objective and I'm just pushing my religious bias. They're pushing their own bias. Now, I mentioned today is going to have a lot of technical data. Don't get lost in the details. You can let your eyes roll back in your head when I do some of these. I'm going to raise the bar a little bit for the level of we're talking about, but I don't want you to get sucked up in that. This is the kind of discussion scholars have and write about. But all people, including scholars, filter raw data through their worldviews. Some worldviews contain many assumptions. Other worldviews are so biased against the reality of God, the truth of the Bible, the resurrection of Jesus, that no amount of evidence can overcome those biases. When I first came to the back to faith, I was raised in the church, but I tried to walk away, and I decided I would just investigate the resurrection of Jesus, because if he didn't raise from the dead, I could kick Christianity to the curb, and that's the only God that seemed to be nagging me. It wasn't Buddha or Krishna, some other God that was messing with my my morality. So I wanted to prove it didn't happen, and then I could be free to do what I wanted. And it was an examination of the evidence that convinced me that this was true. And I thought, well, I'll just share that evidence with anybody, and they will obviously come to the same conclusion. It was a very rude awakening for me that some people, no amount of evidence will change their mind. Their worldview, their presuppositions have so tainted their ability to objectively look at anything that you're not going to overcome those biases. And I turn it up to God. My job is to share the information. It's the Holy Spirit's job to open people's heart, and God's job to convert whoever he wants to convert. So I don't even think I'm trying to come out here and convince you. But we've also seen a huge deterioration in the ability of many people to use and apply critical thinking skills. I am shocked by the amount of just utter nonsense that I see spread around by otherwise rational people. Okay, in the community, the MAGA Q community, and those kind of communities, a lot of people felt like they'd been lied to about many things, and then but they have no skepticism about other stuff they hear on the internet. It was like, we believe it. If it was in some post by some anonymous person, I absolutely believe it. That lack of skepticism, that lack of ability to apply critical thinking skills, has allowed the grifters and false prophets and false teachers to thrive in their midst. So that's the other thing I want you to take away from this. I want you to question everybody, including me. You listen to what they say with an open mind, and then test it by what you know to be true. And I'm assuming that you already know the Bible to be true. If you haven't, then start doing that work and figure out that the Bible is true, because you need something to test it against, right? And I have earlier streams, you can go back and start going through them, where I look through, is the Bible reliable? Does God exist? Where's the Trinity come from? All my streams are on Cloud Hub, channel 217, and you can go back and read and watch any of them at any time. But I want you to take away from this study that idea that you should question everyone and everything. And remember the old Wendy's commercial with that old lady always saying, "Where's the beef?" Kind of promoting Wendy's larger hamburger. Horrible tasting hamburger, but it's larger. We should be asking, where's the evidence, and what assumptions are you including in your conclusions? I see people making bald claims on the internet constantly, and I ask them for a source, and they'll provide me some internet article. No scholarly book, no primary source material, no nothing. I said, oh my God, you people, you lost the ability to do research. Now, there was a show called The Bible's Buried Secrets. It played on Nova. The thing, it was back in 2008. They made it. It's replayed a number of times, but I'm using this as an example because it's a great example of how people can hide their confirmation biases and make it seem like they're telling you objective stories and objective truth. And this is what all the scholars believe. So in that film, the Bible's Buried Secrets, the opening of the show starts with a bold declaration that God is dead. Okay, that kind of tipped their hand on their worldview. But I found the rest of the program subtle, as it attacked the Bible, Judaism, Christianity. Had the presenters continued with that direct assault, like God is dead, and came straight out and said that the Bible is a fraud and all the stories it contains about creation, miracles, the Exodus, Abraham, Moses, Joshua, David, and the resurrection of Jesus are false, that might have promoted an immediate reaction in the viewers. That was obviously their point, and they made it clearly if you paid attention, but they presented the ideas with such subtlety that the claims aren't immediately offensive to most people. They also disguised their bias by citing numerous scholars. Oh, this is a common tactic, okay? You just bring out a bunch of people who all have the same worldview you do, let them parade and confirm what you say, and it seems like the whole world believes that stuff, right? So you get in this little, in this case, it's a bunch of naturalists, historians and archaeologists that don't believe in God, don't believe the Exodus happened, don't believe any of this stuff, and they all agree with each other. You can get the same thing in any group. You have groups of Christians that will get together and they don't critically ask questions when somebody starts making statements. Somebody claims miracles happened or they did that. You want to believe, your confirmation bias is to believe that stuff. So you don't critically question it. Where's the evidence? You said this guy raised from the dead or grew a new leg or whatever. Where's the evidence? Where's the medical report that he lost his leg and the medical report that it's back? Where's the evidence? What town? Who could I interview? That kind of stuff. We don't ask those questions. People claim to be apostles and prophets. We don't question them. We just assume they're true. If it came off of some post, by an anonymous person on the internet, or some anon supposedly decoded it, it's treated as holy writ. That's the same kind of nonsense that these people are doing in attacking Christianity. So you don't want to use their methodology. I want you to bring your brain into this conversation. Don't check it at the door. Question everyone and everything. Okay? Now, I got a whole long list of names here. I'm not going to read it. But these are serious archaeologists and historians. They brought in incredible people. And when you first look at it and you're saying, well, my God, this really must be the case. You got all these scholars agree, right? Now, let's just go over a basic summary of their claims. There's no archaeological evidence to corroborate the stories of the Garden of Eden, Noah's flood, or the Tower of Babel. Bull. Okay? Probably true with the Garden of Eden, not true with Noah's flood or the Tower of Babel. Modern biology, geoscience, chemistry, physics, and astronomy have debunked the literal interpretation of both Genesis creation narrative and a Genesis flood narrative. Again, bull. The sciences actually proved the existence of God and disproved naturalism. There is, and if you want to take, I've attacked the literal principle of biblical interpretation as a fallacy created by fundamentalist thought and used by evangelicals. But if you take the Bible and allow it to use literary devices like metaphors and similes, time compression, time expansion, all the things that it uses, then a literal interpretation of Genesis and the flood are perfectly acceptable. If you want to take it in a wooden literal sense, like some fundamentalists do, I think you're going to be in trouble. Okay? Linguistics has also debunked the Tower of Babel. Again, not true. Okay? It's just not. Just because certain languages, modern languages, thousands of years after the fact, have no known similarity to one another today, does not mean it's disproven, right? There's no historical evidence for the existence of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Esau, Joseph, or Moses, or characters in the book of Genesis or the book of Exodus. Again, also blatantly false. As I will point out, a researcher from the Christian Research Institute, former researcher Brad Sparks, has found over 700 Egyptian sources corroborating the Bible and their story of the Exodus. Those are Egyptian sources. Those aren't Canaanite or Jewish sources. Those are Egyptian sources. One of them uses the Hebrew name of God and blames him for the destruction of mankind, and from their point of view, it's the destruction of Egypt. There is no archaeological evidence to corroborate the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah as well. Again, not true. There is no evidence to support the mass exodus of Israelites from Egypt reported in the book of Exodus, although scholars believe that a small group did escape Egypt. However, they were not Israelites but Canaanite slaves. On their journey back to Canaan, they passed through Midian, where they may have been inspired by stories of Shashu's god, YHW. Okay, again, like I said, I'm only pointing to one scholar, 700 Egyptian sources. There are more scholars than that. There's a ton of scholars. Now, you want to stay away from the internet trivia or dribble, like these Exodus films that are coming out by people like Ron Wyatt and his ilk that are fabricating evidence for the Exodus. Stay clear of them. But real scholars have produced the evidence, okay? The land of Canaan, called the Promised Land in the Hebrew Bible, was not taken over by conquest as described in the book of Joshua. Rather, the Israelites actually might have been Canaanites who migrated into the highlands and created a new identity for themselves, right? They fabricated this whole story. Of the 31 sites the Bible says that Joshua conquered, few show any signs of war. And then this is William Deaver said, Joshua really didn't fight the Battle of Jericho. Again, there are scholars that disagree with him, but they just pick a scholar that fits their worldview. The events of the Israelite kingdom given in the books of Samuel and the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles are more or less accurate history. Now, they're going to pick and choose there what they think is accurate, but there's a list of names and stuff. There's such detail in those books, it was hard for them to get rid of them. And the Bible's first books have been traced back to multiple authors writing over a span of centuries. And this is the documentary hypothesis, or the supplementary hypothesis. I'm going to deal with those in a minute, or at least the documentary hypothesis, and explain it. The early books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Samuel, and Kings, reached almost their present form during the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC. Okay? There was redaction, copyist changes in the Bible. You can see it. You don't even have to go outside the Bible. Just the differences between the Septuagint version and the Masoretic text, the differences you see in the various versions of the books that are in the Dead Sea Scrolls, shows you that redaction occurred in the Old Testament and some editing took place. That's not a problem. Did it happen by the Babylonian exile? It happened before and after that exile. This is nonsense. There was stuff that happened. There were changes made in the Bible. There were changes made in the genealogies of Genesis 5 and 13 to counter Christian claims that didn't happen to about 150 AD. Okay? Their next point is the Israelite religion was not exclusively monotheistic from the beginning as suggested in the Hebrew Bible. Rather, the archaeological evidence indicated that before the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC, the early Israelites were polytheistic, or rather henotheistic, and worshipped a local god, Yahweh, alongside his wife, a fertility god, Ashereth. This is just complete bunk. But let me explain a word here. Okay, henotheistic is the belief that more than one god exists, but you only worship one of them. They're all equal gods. You just pick one you like. He's your local deity. That is not at all what the Old Testament teaches, what the Jews teach, what any version of the Bible ever taught. But henotheistic and monotheism are words that are not created until the 17th and 18th centuries. And they inaccurately describe their views, and I'll deal with that in just a second. The emergence of monotheism and the belief that universality of Yahweh was a response to a tragic experience of the Babylonian exile of the Israelites in the 6th century BC, according to Deaver. We just studied Isaiah. Isaiah alone disproves Deaver's point, right? But there's plenty other ones. So to the people who haven't been exposed to this type of material before, this self-proclaimed documentary, it calls itself a documentary. It is an opinion piece, a hit piece against Judaism and Christianity and the Bible, dressed up as a documentary. That this is what a lot of these people do. And I talked to a friend after watching this show who's a fairly new Christian, and he was pretty impressed with the show, and he didn't realize that they were destroying his faith right in front of him. Now, when I went over what the show contained and how it attacked his faith and how they were twisting what the truth was, his eyes lit up like, whoa, wait a second, I didn't see any of that. That's because of the techniques they're using in doing this, by making it seem like they're objectively looking at the Bible just as history. And you'll see the same thing happen in college courses that study the Bible as history. It's an attack on the Bible, and it's done under the guise that they're looking at it as objective history. They are not. So I can't possibly address every error in this opinion piece posing as a documentary, but I'm going to hit a few of them in the hope of exposing the biases typical in these types of things. I'm just going to pull a few out here, right? In addition to these seemingly scholarly attacks on the faith, there are many people spreading nonsense to advance their agenda. The spreading of false and seemingly authoritative information is not a new thing. Even the Apostle Paul had to battle falsehoods that were being spread around in letters reportedly from him. And I gave you the quote from 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 and 2, and he says, don't be dissuaded even by a letter seeming to be from us. People were producing fraudulent documentation, attacking Christianity and attacking the apostles in the 1st century. Do not be surprised that it's happening now, but you need to learn how to spot it. but you got a kind of perfect storm that's developed in recent years. You got a combination of the ease of sharing information over the internet, along with the lack of teaching how to use critical thinking skills, that has increased the amount of misinformation exponentially. For today's study, I'm focusing on the highly biased and skewed data presented in what at first glance appears to be an objectively scholarly manner. The NOVA program I'm citing is a great example of this type of deception, and I'm hoping that you can use examples from here to help you spot this deception elsewhere, because that's really what I want you to take from this. I don't want you to get bogged down in all the details, right? So what is this documentary hypothesis? It's not one specific hypothesis. This name's given for any understanding that the origin of the Torah and the first 5 books, that it claims that they were basically 4 sources, and that were somehow redacted together into a final version. This hypothesis is also known as JEDP, which is an acronym that gives the names to the 4 hypothetical sources by the proponents of the hypothesis. You have hypothetical sources, you have a hypothetical hypothesis that they were redacted, now that these sources were used to create the Bible, and with some truth. There was redaction in the Old Testament. With editing, that's absolutely true, right? Not to the point the scholars want you to think there was, but there is some. So the J source is the source where God's name is always given, and we often represent it as YHWH or Yahweh. But German scholars, the Y is pronounced like a J and the W a V, so it's JHVH, and they used the vowel points from Adonai and created the word Jehovah. We often call it Yahweh. They're both the same word. These sources use that name. Then they have E sources, and that's the source where the God's name is always presented as El or Elohim. Okay? El is singular, and Elohim is plural. So Elohim literally translates as gods. This is part of what they're going to use to prove that they were polytheistic, and I'll deal with that later, right? But and when I got a V in here, I got half German in the next one. It's YHWH, right? The D source is the source from which the redactors wrote the books of Deuteronomy and the books of Judges, Joshua, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. So we're out of the Pentateuch and into other books in the Old Testament for the D sources, and the P sources is the source known as priestly material. It uses Elohim, El Shaddai as the names of God, and so those would be used for other books in the Bible. So this hypothesis speculates that other sources existed, speculates, I want you to hear how often I'm using speculates that those sources were put together at later dates and redacted and finally put out in their final form, okay? So what evidence do they have? The documenting hypothesis is just made up out of whole cloth? No. There are variations in the divine name in the Torah, right? The secondary variations in dictation and style. The Bible doesn't seem to, or the books don't, when you read them in the original language, which I do not have that ability, they seem to change the style that they're written in, which indicates that there may be a different scribe copying them down. The use of amuses in the New Testament, I've already talked about, as opposed to a scribe taking literal dictation. An amusis is taught the information and writes it out in his own words. And Luke is an amusis for Paul. Mark is an amusis for Peter. Those are common. The fact that they might have used amusis in the Old Testament, does not make it not original. The parallel and duplicate accounts, what they call doublets or triplets, are stories that are repeated with different points of view. Famous doublets include 2 creation accounts, Genesis 1, Genesis 2. In the story of the covenant between God and Abraham, the naming of Isaac, the 2 stories in which Abraham claims to be king, that his wife is really his sister, the 2 stories The revelation of Jacob at Bethel, a famed triplet, is the three different versions of how the town of Beersheba got its name. Okay? The continuity of the alleged various sources and the political assumptions implicit in the text, the interests of the author seem to be different, right? So that's why people looked at these differences and said, well, this could be explained if there's multiplicity of authors, right? The passages in the Torah which seem to imply more than one author. Some examples include Genesis 11:31 describes Abraham as living in Ur of the Chaldees, but the scholar claims that the Chaldeans did not exist at the time but modern scholars claim that Chaldeans didn't exist at the time of Abraham. So that's like somebody using a modern name for something that doesn't exist. Numbers 25 describes the rebellion at Peor and refers to Moabite women. The next sentence says the women were Midianites. Well, there's no issue with a later scribe using a more modern term to identify people, right? When we talk about in the Bible and translations of the Bible, we do the same thing today. We don't use the proper name for Roman or Greek currency or Jewish currency. A lot of times, like your King James Bible will use currency that was in circulation at the time of King James to give so that the reader doesn't have to go look up some reference and try to figure out what a pence is. I mean, they knew what a pence is, what a widow's mite is, what these different values were. They use modern things. That doesn't mean the original didn't have the original term. The list of Edomite kings, including kings whose scholars claims were not born until after Moses' death, right? Again, we got to question whether the scholars' dates are correct, and I'm going to deal with dating in just a minute. But they say, we decided these kings weren't born until after Moses died, therefore they couldn't have been written by Moses. And you follow that logic? Some locations are identified by names which scholars claim did not exist until long after the time of Moses' death. Okay? Now, again, that doesn't mean that later, redaction, translation, when you went from ancient Hebrew into modern Hebrew, that the names weren't changed to the modern version of that area. Now, what evidence refutes the documentary hypothesis? And I would be all day on this one subject if I didn't provide you this link. But this link's going to be in my PDF on GeoCities. It's a great refutation, point by point, and a scholarly refutation of documentary hypothesis. But I told you, I've already decided from my own investigation that Jesus is God in human flesh, right? I have evidence supporting that Jesus raised from the dead and that Jesus is who he said he was. Now, Jesus, being God in human flesh, wouldn't lie, and he would know whether or not Moses wrote the books, right? And he claimed that Moses is the author of the Pentateuch. Often in the New Testament, when Jesus is quoting the law, he identifies Moses as a person whose words he is quoting. Mark 10:4-8. Jesus quoted Genesis 2:24, which would be of the J sources, as coming from Moses. In Mark 7:10, Jesus quoted the Ten Commandments, which fell into the E category as coming from Moses. Mark 10:3, Jesus refers to Deuteronomy 24:1, which would be a D source, as being from Moses. And Mark 8:4, Jesus quoted from Leviticus 14, which would be equivalent to a P source, as coming from Moses. So Jesus took quotes from all four of these supposed sources and said Moses wrote them all. You want to believe these scholars, or do you want to believe the Son of the living God? Okay? This is where I'm at. So you're welcome to go look at that site. It's a very good refutation if you want scholarly arguments, because people that don't accept Jesus, you need another way to convince them. But if you already accept Jesus is really God in human flesh, his rebuttal of this thesis should be enough, right? Now, I dealt with this a little bit when I started Isaiah, but it's called the Deutero-Isaiah theory. and it's directly related to the documentary hypothesis, but it's like a sub-hypothesis. And it attributes the authorship of many other books in the Bible to multiple authors at later dates than they claim to be written, and redactors. Daniel's claimed to be written later because Daniel is an accurate portrayal, so accurate in his portrayal of history that they said he couldn't have wrote it. It must have been written after the fact. Otherwise, they'd have to deal with how Daniel knew things were going to come that way. And without God, you have a problem. Well, they had to do the same thing with Isaiah because Isaiah so accurately predicts the coming Babylonian exile and their release from Babylon that if they don't have Isaiah, at least that section of Isaiah, written later by some other person putting Isaiah's name on the book, then they have to explain how Isaiah knew that was going to happen. And without God, you have a problem. Now, this covers one problem for him, but the other problem is Isaiah also predicts with astounding accuracy many things about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. None of these dates on Deutero or Tredero, three apostle authors of Isaiah, explains how Isaiah could have possibly known these details about the life of Christ. So all they did is kick the can down the road with their theory, right? But again, I looked at Jesus as my source. You know, if Jesus is God in human flesh, and this theory runs into insurmountable problems, and I'm going to show you why. Because Jesus quotes from different sections of Isaiah and says Isaiah wrote them. Jesus quoting from Isaiah 29:13, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. Mark 7:6-7. He's quoting from the early part of Isaiah, which would be the first Isaiah. Jesus also referenced Isaiah 42:1-4 in Matthew 12:17, which was fulfilled that was spoken about by the prophet Isaiah. Again, claims that is written by Isaiah, the same Isaiah, but the Deutero-Isaiah theory says this is a different Isaiah. Also, it is also referenced in Mark 8:16-17 by quoting Isaiah 53. Now, in the Tredero-Isaiah theory, this is a third Isaiah writing, okay? And Jesus quotes him and says this was to fulfill what was spoken through by the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and carried our diseases. So Jesus quotes from all three of the supposed sources of Isaiah and says Isaiah wrote it. For me, it's good enough because I've already decided from other investigations that Jesus is God in human flesh. So aside from the passages quoted by Jesus above, several other New Testament verses refer to the prophet Isaiah as having been the sole author. Matthew 3:3, Luke 3:4, Romans 10:16-20, John 12:38-41. But the fact that our Lord affirmed Isaiah's authorship by quoting both sections of the book and attributing them to Isaiah is proof enough the entire book authored it. Now I've excerpted this page, this slide, from the Got Questions website because I thought he did a good job of pulling this out. I don't agree with everything on Got Questions. I don't agree with everything I read almost anywhere. But I try to give people credit when they do a good job. The second assumption in the NOVA program that I'm going to deal with is that there's no Exodus. They accurately quote Exodus 1:11 as saying that the Jews built the cities of Pithom and Ramesses. They also claim Ramses II as the pharaoh who is traditionally thought. See, thought, believed, speculated, add whatever one you want in here, to be the pharaoh of the Exodus. I will tell you from my investigation, he is not the pharaoh of the Exodus, but that's okay. However, numerous other pharaohs have been suggested by scholars as being the pharaoh that was on the throne during the Exodus, but that dispute is left out of the presentation by Noah. They just pick one that fits their worldview, and they ignore all the data that disagrees with their worldview. Do you see how this is going on? Now they have assumed that Ramses II is the correct pharaoh, and then they throw in dates of his rule from 1279 to 1213, which are bogus also. but I'll deal with the dates in a minute. Thereby, they fixed the boundaries of the dates for the Exodus that would have taken place if it occurred. There's too many problems to deal with it. But just imagine, if I'm correct, and they're wrong on their dates for even Ramses, and they're wrong on the date for the Exodus. Imagine looking for evidence of World War II, and you only look between 1812 and 1840. You going to find it? Or are you going to say there's no evidence World War II ever happened? Okay? That's exactly what Egyptologists do. They created artificial dates that they admit are not correct and no way to prove. And then they look in only those dates for evidence of the Exodus and do it. So I'm telling you, Egyptologists openly admit in their own writings that there's no accurate method for establishing Egyptian dates. They write this to themselves. In the same books, they often write certain dates down as if they're fact. The Egyptians used no single system for dating. They didn't use a consistent method of dating regnal years. They had no idea of an era like Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. They did not use named years. Okay, so try to reconcile their calendars. Okay, sorry. All known list of pharaohs are incomplete even when the text we find is complete. They're just like the genealogies in the Old Testament. They're incomplete, and you can prove that in the Old Testament without looking at other sources. That names are skipped, people are left out. They're all incomplete, the list of the pharaohs. There is conflicting information concerning different lists of the same pharaohs. Sometimes they get different names in there. Okay? Now, the Sothic cycle, which is this idea that I think it's 1420 years that the calendar, Sirius, the star Sirius rises at the right time, the calendar comes in the cycle, was once thought to be a method of reconciling these dates, but it has now even been largely discarded as unreliable. So even what they thought was a scientific method of proving Egyptologist dates has been just thrown out by scientists and Egyptologists, okay, not Christians. Egyptologists know that Egypt was at times two kingdoms, Upper and Lower Egypt, but don't know the dates when it was divided or unified, so there is no way, understand this, no way of knowing if a list of pharaohs includes one or more pharaohs that were coterminous. If you've got a pharaoh in Upper Egypt and a pharaoh in Lower Egypt, both ruling at the same time, you wouldn't know when that happens. Now, we have an example of the story. Remember Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat? Neo's been talking about him lately. He was second in command in Egypt. But then suddenly a pharaoh rose up that knew not Joseph. How could possibly the person taken over for the previous pharaoh not know who Joseph was? The problem is Joseph's in Upper Egypt, and a pharaoh from Lower Egypt conquered Upper Egypt, and that pharaoh had no idea who Joseph was. He's not from the same kingdom. That's one example of where the Bible has two different pharaohs from the two different kingdoms listed, but we have no way, and no Egyptologist has a way of knowing when these are done. There have been people that speculated, and they're reasonable speculations, but you want to understand when you're dealing with speculations and assumptions and when you're dealing with facts and corroborated and established facts, right? The key point I want you to hear is Egyptologists don't even agree on dates. They openly admit in their own writing that there's no accurate way for establishing these dates, but Nova took one set of dates and presented as if they're undisputed. No dates are undisputed among Egyptologists. They took one possible pharaoh of the Exodus period and declared him to be the correct pharaoh, with no mention of any controversy surrounding their claim. But the date issue gets more problematic the more we look into it. There's an increasing amount of evidence supporting the idea that the list of pharaohs overlapping coterminous pharaohs from Upper and Lower Egypt. If this is proven to be the solution to these dating problems, it could alter dates by centuries, not by days or months. Okay? We're talking about predictions and dates that are in all of the textbooks about Egyptian history that could be off by hundreds of years. And I will tell you, even among Egyptologists, they start with what they call generally accepted dates. Now, when you start in the first early kingdom where they start this, they're usually within a decade or so of each other. But by the time you get down 26 dynasties, they're off among themselves by as much as 400 years. And I'm telling you, that's understated. Right? So if there's more information discovered and it proves that a significant number of these pharaohs on the list were coterminous rulers rather than a linear descendants, then all the dates go out the window. Right? Now, Walker and Cardno and Sephardi published this chart comprising secular chronology with David Dow's most recent model. And I provided a link because I don't want to get too far out in the weeds. But if you're really interested in this idea of coterminous pharaohs, these are scholars that have tried to put it together. And surprise, surprise, Egypt doesn't start until after the flood. One of the arguments against the flood is that Egyptian history goes back right through the flood. And once you fix the pharaoh issue, Egyptian history comes post-flood. And I'm not sure if even their dates are correct, but you can see that they offer a different starting date for the first dynasty. The difference from the date used by Noza by about 1,000 years. It's actually over 1,000 years. How can Nova then claim as fact that Ramses II's reign was undeniably from 1279 to 1213? They can't, nobody can, right? And then they declare the Exodus as a myth because it didn't occur between 1279 and 1213 BC. I agree with them, it did not. Okay? I agree, it did not occur during the reign of Ramses II. But that doesn't mean it doesn't agree. It means their assumptions are wrong. Follow this? Their assumptions are wrong. Now, I pulled one chart off of that website, and you're not going to be able to see this, especially if you're on a phone right now, but it's on the PDF. But it gives you the dates in this standardized chronology. And just if you looking at the screen, you can see the upper left of the chart, the light blue, and then look at the bottom of the screen where the light blue is. That's more than 1,000 years, about 1,200 years difference in time. So this diagram is small, but it's a suggested correction of the Egyptian chronology of the data from the first dynasty of over 1,000 years. If you're not sure of your starting point by more than 1,000 years, you cannot say with any specificity that the X happened in X year. I tell people this with their exact date fulfillments of prophecies in Daniel and relate them to Jesus. There's a dispute about the year Jesus was born and the year he died. And there's a span of about 6 years where people have made credible arguments. Now, I favor 33 AD as the death of Jesus and 2 BC as his birth. But I can't tell you with absolute certainty that those are the correct dates. Serious scholars favor a 30 AD resurrection and a 4 BC birth. And some scholars favor a 6 BC birth. So when people start telling you that they have evidence of an exact date fulfillment of the Daniel 9 24 to 27 prophecy, they're full of crap. Sorry, these are Christians that I'm telling you are full of crap. These, just like these secular scholars, are full of crap. They're bringing their presuppositions and their beliefs and their assumptions into the thing and presenting them as facts. You don't want to do that. Be objective and be open to go where the data leads, because trust me, God will withstand your scrutiny. God is not threatened by your investigation. He's not threatened by your questions. But by limiting the time of the Exodus to their assumed dates in the reign of Ramses II, Noah limited the possible dates of the Exodus to a very narrow period. In their sense, there's absolutely no archaeological evidence that is objectively dated during those time periods, which supports the idea of a Hebrew Exodus. They conclude it didn't happen. But here's the problem. All over the tombs of other Egyptian records traditionally dated after the end of the Middle Kingdom, There are records of Pharaoh's armies drowning. There are hieroglyphs showing what appears to be the sea parted, soldiers drowned, and a pharaoh entombed in a watery grave. The Egyptian record of this period is called the destruction of mankind because that's what they saw it as, not the destruction of Egypt, but the destruction of mankind. That's how Egyptocentric their history was, right? And I told you, researcher Brad Sparks has documented more than 700 Egyptian sources corroborating the biblical record of Exodus, not in the time frame that the Nova scholars say it happens. But if you have a record that says the sea was parted and Pharaoh's army drowned, it probably didn't happen twice, right? That record's probably of the Exodus. And your date for that, if it doesn't line up with when the other dates for the Exodus has, maybe your date is wrong. But they never bring that up. So given the foregoing facts, Nova's second assumption is best unjustified. At worst, is completely wrong, but is presented in this show as an undisputed fact. And this is common. I'm picking on the Nova program because it's easy, but this is done in books and programs on a regular basis. It's done in schools and colleges, and people are put to this. And we as a church have failed to teach our kids how to defend themselves against it. Next, the program attacks the historicity of the book of Joshua, right? As I explained before, they say that there's no evidence that these places were conquered by warfare. The claims that Jericho was largely abandoned by the time Joshua got there is an old criticism, but again assumes dates that can't be supported, much less confirmed. Why would Jericho have been abandoned? Perhaps it's because Joshua and God's army destroyed the city, right? But Nova never presents this alternate possibility. If traditional archaeology is off on its dates of the Exodus by several centuries, maybe 1,000 years, then one would assume that it is also off concerning the conquest of Canaan, which is tied to that Exodus, right? Under Joshua. But there's no attempt to be fair, balanced, and present alternative options. They present one point of view. And get me correct, this is a point of view. It's an opinion. It is not fact. Well, the records of Joshua's assault upon the land of Canaan recounts God's instruction to kill every living creature and then declare his victory. The other Old Testament books make it clear that some descendants of the Canaanites lived centuries later. This is some Bible scholars say that this is evidence that God didn't order genocide. I'll deal with that another time. But Nova would have you believe that this is a glaring example of an error in the Bible. But total conquest and total extermination are two different things, and any reasonable examination of the text would allow for one to occur much sooner than the other, right? Or one to occur and the other not at all, as some people claim, right? I think God did order genocide, and he had a reason for doing it. But even if I'm wrong and the other scholars like William Lane Craig and other people are correct, and God didn't order genocide, then there's an alternate explanation for that that's perfectly credible. I know I'm over time. I got a little bit more to go through. I'm going as fast as I can. Hope you can hang with me. If not, the replay will be available. Now, another thing they do is they apply modern definitions to ancient concepts. And I did this with the monotheism and stuff earlier, and now I'm going to return to that point. That henotheistic, which means a devotion to a single primary God while accepting the existence of other possible existence of other gods. The word was coined in early 1800s. Probably doesn't apply to ancient Jews, right? This confuses and conflates ideas. Same thing with monotheism. It's prior to the 17th century, the idea of belief in one God was, that there's one God by nature, was not defined by the word monotheism. So you have Henry Moore, a British philosopher who coined monotheism and says that if you even acknowledge the existence of other gods, then you're not monotheistic. The Bible uses Elohim, which translates as gods, for numerous other beings. Pagan deities, Astarte, the ghost of Samuel. Okay, a lot of things are called Elohim, and if you're going to translate it as gods, then according to Nova, that means the Jews were not monotheistic. But the Jews are explicit, sorry, that Yahweh is the only God by nature, that Yahweh is the one and only creator, that all the other Elohim are creations of Yahweh. If you define Elohim or monotheism as the belief that there is only one creator, one God that created everything else, including the other Elohim, then the Jews were monotheistic prior to Babylonian captivity, during the Babylonian captivity, and after. Now, did some Jews embrace other deities and go after other gods? Absolutely. That's one of the reasons for the Babylonian captivity. Isaiah is absolutely explicit in that statement. He repeats it, I think, 5 or 6 times in the book. Now, just how biased is their worldview? I just showed you. It might surprise many Christians, but many scholars work under the following assumptions. The saga of the Israelites, as told in the Bible, was designed as a morality tale to prove the importance of faith in one God. The stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Joshua demonstrate that the Israelites were rewarded when they obeyed God and were punished when they strayed. They're not necessarily true. In fact, they don't think they are true. That they're morality tales, like Aesop's fables, right? The historical evidence to back up these events is sparse and in some cases contradictory. In particular, the account of Joshua's conquest of Canaan is inconsistent with the archaeological evidence. Cities supposedly conquered by Joshua in the 14th century BC were destroyed long before he came on the scene, such as Ai and Arad had been in ruins for 1,000 years, according to their dates, which we just showed you were assumed and could be off by 1,000 years or more. Okay? They start with one assumption and build other assumption. It's assumption upon assumption, right? The book of Judges, which directly contradicts Joshua and shows the Israelites settling the land over a prolonged period, is near historic reality, but even it can't be taken at face value. So they don't believe any of the books are true, right? These are assumptions they're going into the study with. The archaeological surveys conducted over the past 2 decades in the hills of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Benjamin and Judah on the west bank of the River Jordan indicate the origin and development of Israelite entity was somewhat different from either the rival accounts in the Bible. So they're claiming there's 2 different accounts in the Bible, and that's not correct. The survey was conducted by more than a dozen archaeologists, most of them from Tel Aviv University Institute of Archaeology. Their conclusions were published in From Nomadism to Monarchy, and this is Professor Israel Finkelstein and Professor Nav Naim. Just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you're theistic. Jewish is a nationality, not a religion. Okay? And you understand this. Just because someone's saying a Jew doesn't mean some of the worst anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish things I've seen come out of the mouths of people that are nationalistic Jews. Around 1200 BC, semi-nomads from the desert fringes of the east, joined by elements from Anatolia and the Aegean and the south, possibly including Egypt, began to settle the hill country of Canaan. A large proportion, probably a majority of the population, were refugees from Canaanite city-states destroyed by the Egyptians in one of their periodic invasions. So they're saying there's not even any Israeli people. If there's no Israel, if there's no Abraham, Israel has no claim to the land. Right? Do you understand this? There's no promise made to Israel. There's no promise made to us. This is attacking your thing. This is an assumption, not proven, an assumption they filter everything else through. It is generally accepted among scholars today that there is some genuine historical material in the books of Samuel, which describe the careers of Saul and David, but even these books must be critically examined to distinguish between legend and fact, in as much as it can ever be known. So there might be some truth, but it's probably not true, right? And I'm telling you, the stuff they think is true are the names of people that are listed in there, not necessarily information it contains. Now, the Deuteronomists, this is that D source from the JEDP, right? Are people they assume compiled much of the Old Testament. They also assume that this work started 3 centuries after David and Solomon. right? They assume that apart from the list of names and events, the accounts appear to have undergone two separate acts of editorially slanting. Okay? The original writers show a strong bias against Saul and in favor of David and Solomon. Many years later, these Deuteronomists supposedly edited the material in a manner that conveyed their religious message, inserting reports and anecdotes that strengthen their monotheistic doctrine. When it comes to Jerusalem, however, the challenge is to set the biblical text in the context of archaeological and historical evidence. Okay, their assumptions about archaeological and historical evidence. It's not that it doesn't fit the evidence. It doesn't fit their timeline. It doesn't fit their assumptions about how things. So you start with an assumption, and then you filter your other assumptions through those assumptions, and you build assumption upon assumption, and then you develop a worldview that filters all raw data, right? However, you will almost never see them admit to all these assumptions and biases. They don't even talk about it. They rarely even discuss alternate explanations to the data that would corroborate the biblical text. This is what they do, and this is why I want you to take the time to learn some of this stuff, because it is crazy what they're doing in here. And if you want to hang with me for a few more minutes, I'm going to play a song, because I'm assuming this prompted a question or two, and then I'll read the chat and then try to come back here and answer any questions.
I know you've been trying to keep from crying. Blessed are they who weep. It's not in our power. No man knows the hour. Father, my heart is true. I will run to you. And it's hard to understand, but I'll trust there's a higher plan. And I fall on my knees, and I'm begging you, Jesus, please, to hold me and keep me warm and shelter me from the storm. Lord, help me make it, 'cause my heart can't take it. This burden's too much to bear. The darkness is falling. There's a new day dawning. Comfort me, Lord. Please take all my pain away. And it's hard to understand, but I'll trust in my Master's plan. And I fall on my knees, and I'm begging you, Jesus, to hold me and keep me warm and shelter me from this storm.
Okay, I'm back. If you hang with me for a few more minutes, we'll get this concluded. But I appreciate everybody that stuck with me in the overtime. And so, yeah, Roberta, you're correct. I try to let the Spirit lead me where we're going to go on Fridays. And sometimes things will come up in conversation. I'll run into questions and it'll prompt me to do a study in a certain area or pull out my old notes on a certain area and convert it into one of these shows. And there was a conversation. I hated Twitter. I hate the format, and I equally hate True Social format. But I'm over there because it's a place to try to share some truth in darkness, spread some light among darkness, because there is a plethora of absolute nonsense being spread over there. And so I jumped into some of this thing, and a lot of the people do not want to hear. They don't critically think about anything, and their minds are totally closed to anything that questions them. And look, I benefited from a lot of stuff that was going on in these movements, and MAGA. I'll be MAGA to death, but and I think what happened in Q did a lot of good. But I'm not in the religion of Q. I'm not bowing down to there. I mean, clearly the Anons were wrong about a lot of stuff. And you got to be able to admit that thing and say, wait a second, I can take what's good and get rid of what's bad. But I've watched Michael attack some of it and some other people go on there and just get skewered like they're traitors to the system. Hey, if you said something that's false, and proved out to be untrue, or I have to check my brain at the door to believe it, you need to be called out on it. And a lot of that's going on. I just don't want to get tied up in those conversations all the time because I lose focus on what my purpose is. And my purpose here is to preach God, preach Jesus and Jesus crucified, right? And to correct those kind of things. And I don't want to get caught up in the political stuff. But when I'm in and either watching those conversations or those conversations turn to religious subjects, it sometimes prompts me to do those things. And MAGA, think that's correct. You have an open heart and an open mind, but then you go test it. Like the Bereans in Acts. They listened to Paul and Silas with openness of mind, and then they went and searched the scripture daily to see if what they said was true. You go back and check and see if it's true. And it's not. And there's people over there that I'm shocked at the level of nonsense that is being spread, and it quite frankly is an embarrassment, and it's going to hurt if you are politically leaning on for like a Trump comeback. I'm telling you, part of this crowd is going to hurt his chance because they are. They just seem like a complete bag of loons here, and that's a problem. So if you're going to go there, or in Christian studies, looking at religion, and either from either conservative or liberal scholarship, and you want to read any of those books, you need to figure out how to spot people's worldviews, because there are hints that they will give what they're doing, and that you can take that and go forward. I laid my worldview on the table and how I got there. Most people won't do that for you. That's a pretty rare thing, but you can do this. And thank you all for hanging with me, and I will, God willing, be back on Monday in Isaiah chapter 60. And I, like I said, enjoy your weekend. I know I will over here in Kauai. I'm having a rough life. And with that, God bless you all. I'll see you later.
Your worries and troubles, fear is not from above. Walk boldly and bless those around you. Exhort mercy and love, even when the darkness may surround us. He's the Father that won't let go. Walk through the fire, His name lifted higher. Nothing can ever separate